The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 11th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had heard this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I want you to imagine the scene. Jesus has just come into town 4 days late. At least that's what Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, believed. Jesus is 4 days past due. He got the word that Lazarus was sick, but then remained. So now he shows up late. "Jesus," they say to him, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now these women have had 4 days to mourn. 4 days to try and begin the process of reorienting their life without Lazarus. 4 days of grief, 4 days of that hollow, empty feeling that you have when someone who you love is no longer there. And then Jesus arrives. We don't get to hear this bit of it in our gospel reading, but Martha hears that he's come to town, and so she goes out to meet him. She's not angry with him for not getting there sooner. She doesn't berate his tardiness, but she does state the simple fact, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." Then she adds, "But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Mary's reaction is similar. She goes to find him, she kneels before him and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Because at this point, it's obvious to everyone in the village, including Mary and Martha, that 4 days is simply too long for there to be any hope of Lazarus coming back. In the ancient world, when it was sometimes hard to tell if someone was really dead, everyone could agree that 4 days was dead. That's outside of the tomb. Inside of the tomb, it's dark. There's the smell, the stench of this dead body laid to rest, and it's quiet. The stone that covered the entrance blocked a lot of the sound from the other side, and it being a tomb, there wasn't a lot happening inside. So it's dark, it's full of stink, it's silent, and then the stone is moved, light begins to stream in bit by bit, and the voice of Jesus cries, "Lazarus, come out." And he does. Lazarus comes out in the darkness and the isolation and the decaying stench of death. The voice of Jesus reaches Lazarus, and Lazarus comes out. 4 days dead, lying in a tomb, alone in the dark, life over. And then the voice of Jesus calls forth Lazarus from the tomb, calls forth life from death. But you notice that there was death first. Lazarus was dead. Jesus did not prevent the death from happening. Lazarus did die. But God still is able to bring life out of it. There is death everywhere. Our nature is dying. The leaves are beautiful now, but we know that's because the leaves are dying. This is the reason that we celebrate All Saints Sunday. We recognize, acknowledge, and name the reality of death in our world, particularly the literal and physical death of our friends and our families, our loved ones. But there are other kinds of death, too. There are deaths that make us feel like we're in a tomb of our own, alone in the dark, heavy with the smell of failure and despair. We've been Lazarus. You may be feeling like Lazarus today. I don't know what your death might be. I don't know what your tomb might look like. Maybe death came in the form of a lost job or opportunity. Things were looking good, everything was pointing to the stars aligning and circumstances coming together, and then nothing. A pink slip, a rejection letter, a thanks but no thanks from a school or organization or office that you envisioned yourself at, and now that imagined future is dead. Or death could be a broken relationship. Friendship, marriage, a connection that feels real and deep, but for whatever reason falls apart. Hurtful words and a deep sense of loss dig that tomb that we find ourselves in, and it feels like nothing is going to be the same, and it's hard to imagine moving forward. Perhaps the death that we talk about the least, at least among other people, is the death of faith. Or maybe it's better to say that our relationship with God feels dead. Sometimes that connection to God feels so strong and so powerful, and it erases all of our doubts and concerns, but other times it seems as though there's nothing on the other side of our prayers, as if there's no one there who actually cares about us, who loves us, as if we're just going through the motions. And maybe, just maybe, it is the death of someone that you cared about deeply. And now your grief ebbs and flows in such a way that you're not sure that you'll ever quite feel normal again, whatever normal is. Our mourning can become kind of a death in and of itself, so deep and so heavy that it keeps us from living life as we led it before. So I don't know what your death looks like. It doesn't really matter. In all cases, these deaths are around us and in us. They suck our energy. They leave us drained with little desire to do anything about them. They put us in a tomb, bound in cloth and lifeless, and we sit in this dark, dank cave, unable to do anything else, and we cry out to God, if only you had been here, we would not have died. And Jesus comes. Jesus, who has been there all along, not preventing the death. Not preventing the death that is part of the greater cycle of creation, but instead, Jesus is prepared with the gift of new and abundant life that probably looks like something we haven't imagined before. Jesus doesn't wait for us to gather our own strength. Jesus doesn't wait for us to buck up or get over it or even just have more faith. None of these admonitions or pieces of advice are helpful, and so Jesus doesn't say them. Instead, Jesus comes to the tomb, stands at the entrance of the cave, and calls us out. In the silence, in the darkness, in the isolation, we hear a voice, Lazarus, come out. Walt, come out. Brenda, come out. Insert your name here. It took me a long time to do all of you. Come out. The voice draws us out into the light, into the fresh air, and into the community. The community, by the way, still has to unbind Lazarus. They have a role to play in all of this. It's not through our own power or sheer force of will that we are brought back to life, but through Jesus coming to us. And in the same way that our deaths take different forms and shapes, the voice of Jesus reaches us in different ways. Maybe that's through words of comfort or commiseration from a friend, or through forgiveness proclaimed at the font, or through the words for you shared at the table. But somehow, some way, that beautiful voice of Jesus reaches into the tomb that we find ourselves in and brings us back to life. New life that looks like finding joy in the things you once loved, reconciling broken relationships and finding strength to try building new ones. Opportunities open up and fresh pathways lay out before us, ready to be walked down with our community by our side. New life sprung forth out of darkness. We think of the ones that we've loved and lost, and our hearts begin to feel the joy of memory, even when that memory is tinged in grief. It probably doesn't happen instantaneously, and sometimes the voice might be subtle. It might be hard to hear, but it's there. God is there. God isn't afraid to roll away our stone and smell the stench of our death. God doesn't care if our village has given up on us after 4 days in the tomb. The God who loves us, who wept for Lazarus, weeps for us. The God who loves us does not let death have the last word. God has the last word at the door of death. And God says, child